Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Wherever you are in the world, we appreciate you being with us right now. This is Lovey Life, a DOM podcast. DOM is a digital and bilingual media company specialized in law at the supranational level. So, for all news, comments, analysis related to law in Africa and in the rest of the world, go to our website dom-online.com and follow us on our social media platforms, the links of which are listed below. This, however, is neither a technical nor a political podcast. To be honest, sometimes it's barely a legal one. The only prerequisite needed is to have an open mind and 30 minutes or so to spare. We sometimes will have guests from everywhere around the world, and we will always be keen to hear your thoughts. We have a fantastic episode for you today, so please stay with us and weigh in while we argue the case. Love your life. There are things in life that we take for granted. So much so that we don't realize our unconscious confidence in them until they are gone, or until we see people we know or relate to get through that loss. The most obvious example at the individual level is that of family. The vast majority of people have a family, and to quote the first words of Anna Karenina, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Incidentally, and in my humble opinion, Anna Karenina is one of the greatest books ever written, and Leo Tolstoy, one of the greatest authors ever published. I would even take it a step further and state that as opening words for a book go, these are the very best. Do you agree? What is your favorite book, author, opening lines, or a quote from a book? I would love to know. Okay, let me try and refocus because we have not even properly started the podcast yet. We were talking about family. Fascinating concept, isn't it? Everyone has an opinion on it. There are those that feel lucky and blessed to be part of their respective families, while others, unfortunately, have drawn bad hands and would be more than willing to emancipate themselves from that construct. Whatever one's personal story, there is one constant. Family is not only a word, and it's not only an idea. It's also an institution, an establishment, the one we turn to understand ourselves, or at least a part of it. It is the link to our past, to our lineage. It is our history in motion. Family is more than a collection of people you see or avoid at social gatherings. It may be the reason why you have twins, as they run in your family, or why you have a distrust for certain people. If you pay enough attention to it, in a way it's a cheat code and a shortcut into a sometimes substantive part of your personality. And we take it for granted until we realize that some people have no one on earth to turn to commiserate with or about, to love, being annoyed with, or even hate. I'm not talking about a situation where a person chooses to cut every tie in communication for reasons of his or her own. That is a choice one makes. I am referring to the situation where an individual is literally by him or herself. No parents, sibling, distant cousins to speak of. And this can happen for a multitude of reasons, of course. It may be that someone, by some horrible tragedy, lost everybody. Or it may be that they had no one to begin with. Have I completely ruined your mood yet? I know it's an unpleasant thought, but these are real-life situations. If it is the first time you are listening to our podcast, thank you for giving us a chance. I promise my ramblings usually go somewhere. If you are a returning listener, first of all, thank you. We are so very glad to have you back. You know how this works. We introduce a legal concept by taking an example at the individual level before trying to see the parallels at the international level. In this case, if we transpose the concept of family at the state level, the closest thing to it is that of citizenship. A group of people who, through history, share a bond, a common heritage, sometimes the same prejudices and rivalries, who salute the same flag and root for the same team. In other words, who, even though they may be ashamed or may disagree wholeheartedly with some of the decisions made, can say that they are part of something, but can also choose to not be part of it anymore. By exception to that very general rule, we have people who are stateless. It goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways. Being stateless is very different than being a refugee. You seek refuge by definition because for some reason you can no longer remain safely in your home or your country if you have to cross a border. This means, quite obviously, that you have or have had a home or a country to begin with. Stateless people do not. They are people who are not considered a national by any state under the operation of its law. According to the latest UN data, there are approximately 10 million people in this situation around the world. Can you imagine? I know Tolkien said, "Not all those who wander are lost." But there is something eminently fatalistic about the idea of statelessness. I remember my law teacher introducing the concept using the image of a boat without a port to dock. In hindsight, it was a bit dramatic, I must admit. And also, as we will see later, it's not entirely accurate, as stateless persons are granted some rights and protection in their state of residence, providing that certain criteria are met. But not all statelessness is the same. Remember the broad distinction we made in the case of individuals and their families? Well, the same broad categories also apply to some degree to stateless people. So, first category, someone is stateless because he was never the citizen of any given country. Second category, someone became stateless because he, she, or they have lost their citizenship, either willfully or not. Regarding the first category, meaning someone who is stateless because he or she never had a citizenship to begin with, we cannot say much about it without getting technical and oftentimes applying private international law. But we are going to be general and give examples so that you understand the mechanism. To be clear here, we are talking about initial citizenship, so presumably by newborns, not people who acquire a citizenship later in life through, for example, residency or other means. Now, you know that citizenship of newborn children can be acquired in two different ways. Either by lineage, meaning the kid gets the citizenship of his or her parents, or by the place of birth, meaning that the kid gets the citizenship of the place he or she was born in. Very simple indeed. With these rules in place, the chances of statelessness are largely reduced, and in fact, as most countries recognize dual citizenship, it is quite the opposite. But never fear, something always goes wrong. A simple scenario would be that of a child of whom both parents are themselves stateless, and who is born in a country that only recognizes citizenship by lineage of the parents. In that case, the newborn will be stateless. Another example would be a situation where a kid is born of parents that are residents in a state, not citizens, that's important, resident of a state that only bestows citizenship by lineage, while the parents' state only recognizes citizenship by place of birth. So, in that example, admittedly very unlikely, Both sets of rules are mutually exclusive and leave the child without a country of citizenship. Now, in practice, this would not happen because most countries grant citizenship on the basis of both the parent's citizenship and the place of birth, even when there are caveats. I have oversimplified things for the purpose of putting my points across. You can do the same, by the way, and come up with all sorts of random scenarios in your head. It's a fun game. Can you tell that I'm socially challenged? Anyways, that was the first category of statelessness. People who have always been stateless. The second category, which is the more interesting, I feel, is a situation where someone was a citizen of a country, but for some reason became stateless. As we pointed out earlier, losing a citizenship does not necessarily mean becoming stateless. There is a concept of dual citizenship that is prevalent in most countries now. So, to become stateless, one needs to lose, for whatever reason, one's original citizenship without retaining or acquiring another. Now, so far we have used the word lose citizenship, but that can uncover many situations. For example, a person who decides that he or she disagrees with every single policy his or her government took during his or her lifetime. And as a sign of protest, this person decides to renounce his or her citizenship. Whatever you or I may think of that, this may and this has happened. If this person is not a national of another country, she becomes stateless. Another anecdotal example is that of a person who is going to acquire the citizenship of a country which does not recognize dual citizenship. So, this person goes through the process of applying for citizenship and, as a preventive measure and in order to bolster his or her application, decide to renounce his or her citizenship. If, for some reason, the target country decides to reject that application, or if that application takes longer than expected, the applicant can become stateless, either temporarily or indefinitely. So, not great. But all in all, those are situations where a person willingly loses his or her citizenship. The situation is entirely different when it is the state that decides to strip one of its national of its citizenship. And this can, though not always, make someone stateless. Again, as sovereign entities, each country gets to decide under what circumstances one can lose citizenship. But, as it is the most extreme measure a country can take against one of its own, we usually are looking at the gravest of crimes, either against his or her government or against humanity. Enter Miss Shamima Begum and Miss Hoda Mathuna. Let's meet these characters. Let's start with Miss Hoda Mathuna, for no particular reason except alphabetical. Miss Mathuna was born in New Jersey on October 28, 1994, of Yemenite parents with a father that was a diplomat for Yemen. I am mentioning this here because it is important for the rest of the story. She was raised in Alabama and lived in the US as a US citizen until she was 20. At which point, she told her family that she was going on a school trip in Atlanta. But instead, she left the US in November 2014 to join ISIS in Syria by way of Turkey. A month later, in December 2014, she married an Australian jihadist named Suhan Rahman, who was killed 3 months later in March 2015. Undeterred by the short life expectancy of the men she was attracted to, she married another Tunisian fighter by whom she had a son, He too later died in Mosul in 2017, fighting. It is worth mentioning that during that time, Ms. Mathuna had created a Twitter account, and her feed both encouraged attack against civilians in the US and advocated for more people to travel to ISIS-controlled territory and support the caliphate, as evidently she thought that by all metrics, her life choices had produced enviable outcomes. But, possibly awakened by the sounds of constant bombing and sights of devastation everywhere around her, she decided it was time to flee the caliphate. Following a tortuous route, she ended in Shafa, in eastern Syria, where she met another female recruit who held dual citizenship from US and Canada. Always a romantic at heart, Ms. Hoda Mathuna married for the third time. Then again, the marriage was short-lived, but this time due to divorce and not death. So, improvement, I guess? The two women tried to escape and finally, at long last, surrendered to American troops in January 2019. Ms. Mathuna expressed her desire to be repatriated to the USA. The problem with that also dreamy wish was that 3 years prior that surrender, in January 2016, the US administration, based on her tweets, revoked her US passport and issued a letter stating that though US citizenship as a rule can be acquired through the place of birth, as was the case for Ms. Hoda Mathuna, there is by exception a provision that states that children of diplomats are not concerned with that rule. And in Ms. Mathuna's case, her father's termination of diplomatic status had not been official until February 1995, 4 months after Hoda's birth. By that account, she was not a US citizen. Let's see if you have paid attention a bit. January 2016, I said. And I'm sure you have realized that it was a transition period between the outgoing Obama administration and the incoming Trump one. And as soon as the new government was effectively in command, Mike Pompeo, then Secretary of State of President Trump, issued a press statement that read, quote, Ms. Hoda Mathuna is not a US citizen and will not be admitted to the United States. She does not have any legal basis, no valid US passport, no right to a passport, nor any visa to the United States. We continue to strongly advise all US citizens not to travel to Syria. End of quote. You see, don't ever let anyone tell you that President Obama and President Trump never agreed on anything. This might be the lone exception, but nevertheless, it happened. Fabulous show of continuity in governance. Hoda Mathuna and her family started legal proceedings aiming at proving that her father, Mr. Mathuna, was effectively discharged from his functions in September 1994, meaning a month before Hoda's birth, and therefore, as she was born in the USA, she would have been an American citizen. This argument did not prosper. In November 2019, a federal judge ruled that she was not an American citizen, a decision that was upheld by the DC District Court of Appeal in 2021. And, to close the legal side of it, the United States Supreme Court declined to hear her appeal. So, where does that leave her? Well, she is still held in a prison camp in Syria. And she said in an interview that she felt, quote, completely broken, end of quote, when she was told that she was not a US citizen. She is not allowed to enter the country as there is next to no chance that she is granted a visa. But, at least on paper, she is a Yemeni citizen, through her parents. So, she can avail herself the consular and diplomatic protection of that country if necessary and if the country so chooses. I'm debating if I should add this tad bit of information because it is a bit gossipy and has nothing to do directly, at least, with statelessness. But let's just call me thorough for this. You see, Ms. Hoda's Mathuna sister, Awa Mathuna, was arrested in April 2021 while she was trying to reach the Middle East by cargo ship to go and fight for ISIS. Make of that what you will. The second case is that of Shamima Begum, and that is, at least legally speaking, way more interesting. So, Ms. Begum was born in England in August 1999 of immigrant parents of Bangladeshi origin and citizenship, which is going to be important later on. She attended Bethnal Green Academy until February 2015, where, at age 15, she and two of her friends, namely Khadija Sultana and Amira Abbasi, flew to Turkey to join Syria and fight for the caliphate. How did they manage to get the money for the tickets? They simply stole jewels from their respective families. Nothing simpler. Anyways, they were declared missing by the UK government, and every assurance was given in the media that the investigation would be exhaustive, as a couple of months prior, another girl from the same establishment had also left to join ISIS. We would learn later on that they married fighters upon their arrival and moved to the homes of their respective husbands. When we say married, please keep in mind that these girls were 15 at the time. So, there might be some problems regarding the validity of these unions. Khadija Sultana married a fighter of Somali descent and was killed in an airstrike in August 2016. Amira Abbasi married an Australian jihadist named Abdullah Elmir, who was killed in July 2016, while no one knows what happened to his bride Amira. Shamima Begum married Yago Rejic, a Dutch-born citizen that surrendered to Allied forces and is currently detained in a prison camp as we speak. And Holland has already stated that the country will not be organizing his repatriation. The couple had 3 children together, all of whom died during infancy due to malnutrition and other health conditions. It was reported, though not corroborated, that during her time in Syria, Shamima Begum was an enforcer in ISIL's morality police and tried to recruit other young women to join the jihadist group. Her whereabouts and her story remained a complete mystery until she was found by a war correspondent, Mr. Anthony Lloyd, in a refugee camp in northern Syria when she was heavily pregnant, expecting her 3rd child. In an interview, as was the case with Miss Hoda Mathuna, she expressed her desire to come back to the UK to raise their child. Unfortunately, the boy would not live past the first couple of months, as the official cause of death was declared to be pneumonia. The English government decided to strip her of her nationality. The similarities with Hoda Mathuna are glaring, but there are also differences, both in fact and in law. Factually speaking first, where the US-born Yemeni woman was contrite and begged for forgiveness, Ms. Shamima Begum was less repentant. She never expressly stated that she regretted joining ISIS, and in an interesting comment, she said that she still believed in, quote, some British values, end of quote. Legally speaking, which is after all what we care about here, the UK government stripped her of her British citizenship the day after she was found, using as a rationale that because both of her parents were of Bangladeshi origin and citizenship, their daughter had Bangladeshi citizenship too. However, Bangladesh stated that Begum did not currently hold Bangladeshi citizenship and without it would not be allowed to enter Bangladesh, a position the country has maintained throughout these proceedings. So, the decision to revoke her British citizenship would effectively leave Ms. Begum stateless, which is unlawful under the British Nationality Act of 1981, Section 40, and is also contrary to the United Nations Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness, of which the UK is a signing state. After lengthy legal proceedings, the Supreme Court of the Kingdom denied Shamima Begum's right to enter the state and challenged the decision to strip her of her citizenship. This does not solve at all the question of statelessness, and given that Bangladesh holds firm on its decision and has even threatened to decapitate Shamima Begum should she try to enter its territory due to their zero-tolerance policy against terrorism, it would seem that there is one more stateless person in the world. If her case is closed before a court of law, Shamima Begum is trying, however, to change her perception in the court of public opinion. She has given interviews where she is adamant in stating that she is not a monster. Now, it must be said that being stateless does not mean in any way being lawless. Indeed, according to the International Convention relating to the status of stateless people, most stateless persons enjoy rights in their country of residence, such as the right to work, the right to acquire movable and/or immovable property, the right to form an association, to petition the courts, the right to earn a living, whether through liberal profession, self-employment, or in a wage-earning employment. More interestingly, perhaps, the country of residence shall issue identity papers to any stateless person in their territory who does not possess a valid document, as well as travel documents for the purpose of traveling outside of their territory, unless compelling reasons of national security or public order otherwise require. There is a caveat, however, under this convention. The benefit listed in the instrument do not apply, inter alia, to people who have committed a crime against peace, a war crime, or a crime against humanity, as defined in the international instrument drawn up to make provisions in respect of such crimes. The benefits listed in the instrument also do not apply to people who have committed a serious non-political crime outside the country of their residence prior to their admission to that country. And finally, benefits of the convention do not apply to people who have been guilty of acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. An argument could therefore be made that in case Shamima Begum is indeed regarded as stateless, she may have no other choice than to remain for the rest of her life in the prison camp she has been living in for the past 4 years, as life as a way to remind people that if you don't care about the law doesn't care about you. Thank you so much for being with us today. I want to hear what you have to say. Do you have any comments, question? Does it make sense or does it not? Leave a comment below the link of the episode on our social media platforms using the hashtag #LovieLife. The transcript of the program will be available on DOM's website in both French and English. If you have enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing, liking it, and subscribing to the show. We have had some great episodes previously, and we would be very grateful if you would consider listening to them.